Alright, hi guys! Welcome to this special episode of Animediate. It's a bonus episode, and it's got me, Katie, and I'm going to be talking even more about Neon Genesis Evangelion and Evangelion, the end of Evangelion, the film, because we haven't discussed it enough, and I listened to the previous episode of the podcast, and they were really fun. And I'm with Harry today. He's going to be sort of guiding me through it, because it's my first ever episode, and it's super exciting, and I really really love the show, so hopefully, and the film, so hopefully I can get a bit of that across. So Harry, what are you thinking?
Well, I thought the fact that we just hadn't done enough hours of content on Evangelion, we should really do a bonus episode. It's not like we've done at least about 6 hours plus on the entire show and film. But yeah, I mean, you were watching it alongside the podcast, and we were kind of talking about it. And then I think I just kind of said on a whim, oh, would you ever want to do a podcast? Because of how many messages you were sending me about how much you loved the finale. And you were like, yeah, so that's where this has come from.
Yeah, that's definitely absolutely true with the number of messages I think I was sending you. This is definitely a good chance for me to just rant about it. Overall, I really loved it. I went in not expecting to enjoy it half as much as I did, but I came out of it just obsessed. Pretty much. It was really good.
What's your favourite element of the show?
Okay, so my favourite element is definitely gotta be the character building. I think they just do that so well. All the rest of it, the visuals are really fun, and the story's confusing, but the characters just pull it all together, and then I'm just that's what definitely sold me, and that's what kept me going, for sure. I don't think I went in expecting to like that as much as I did. And so despite all the confusingness going on, I was like, no, this is fine. I don't care about that. Just the characters.
Which characters, more specifically, would you say were your favourite?
So I think definitely hands down, Asuka is my favourite character. And I'm trying to get her name right. I can never say her name right, so I'll get there. Asuka is definitely my favourite character in the whole show. I think from the minute that she just stepped out on that deck on the boat, and she's just standing there and doing this power stance, and I was just like, yeah, you're gonna be iconic. And she definitely went through with being an iconic character. And I guess at some points I can see why some people might think, oh, she's a bit of an annoying character to start with, but I was just like, nah, I can see where you're coming from. I get your point and everything. And I think that's sort of and just how her character develops throughout it, just works so well. And so overall, I definitely like her a lot. Because I remember you saying, didn't you, Harry, that you weren't so sure if I'd like her when she first appears.
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely, she comes in and fucks shit up. That's pretty much her role. So I thought that might frustrate you. I don't know. I know that when we did the podcast, we were some people on it didn't like her as much, and then she kind of wins you around by the end. So it's interesting that you kind of immediately took to her.
Yeah, definitely. Because that was one thing that I found really fascinating when I was listening to your podcast, was hearing all the sort of contradicting views on her. And I definitely see what you mean by she sort of comes in and sort of disrupts it. But also I find how quickly this sort of really funny sort of relationship between her and Shinji just sort of builds up. And it just is so funny, but then it also progresses to being something really sort of slightly more, not necessarily deep, but they sort of evolve with each other as the show progresses, and sort of as Shinji finds things harder, so does Asuka find things harder. And they're sort of sharing in this trauma, but also they can't quite share with each other because they're 14 and they're kind of awkward and they don't quite know how to sort of express it with each other. But being so sort of vulnerable as those characters are, but then you see how they progress and things, it just works really well, I find, definitely, for sure.
With you saying that, I think it's kind of interesting, because your favourite episode's episode 15, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And that's one where when we were doing the podcast, we didn't really talk about it that much because we were talking about like the really big kind of dramatic moments of kind of action and like character. And 15 is kind of very subtle, and it's a lot more kind of smaller moments.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've summed it up really well. The reason why it's one of my favorite episodes is because it is so mundane and sort of simple compared to some of the other really dramatic parts. You really do start to touch on these characters and sort of see more for who they are a little bit on that slightly deeper level. Like, they're not just these pilots of these great big machines. And like the other characters like Misato and Kaji and Ritsuko, they're not just sort of controlling the big things that stood behind their glass windows looking out and sort of shouting orders. You sort of get onto slightly deeper level with them, which is sort of touched on in a few of the earlier episodes, but this one just does it in such a sort of slow and gentle way that I really like. And I know I mentioned before how Asuka and Shinji's relationship is like, I think is a really nice one throughout the show. And you sort of get a bit more of that in this one. Like when they sort of do that, I think it is in this episode, right, where they sort of do that really awkward kiss.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and is so sort of like cute, but also it's not cute at the same time because you're just like almost like squealing with awkwardness for them. And but you see a bit more like how, I suppose in a way, like they've been chucked into these great big giant robots, but at the end of the day, they are just 14-year-olds. They're not like taught how to be a hero from the get go, and they don't really know what they're doing most of the time. So you sort of do see that a bit more in this one. And then you just have with the three of them at the Misato, Kaji, and Ritsuko at the wedding party, and you hear a bit more about sort of their back history. And then when Misato and Kaji are walking home, and it's so nice that sort of moment because you sort of see them, but then Misato sort of starts expressing more of her emotions and getting all devastatingly upset about everything, and you do start to know a bit more about how they're not these sort of like perfect people in control. And you see these bits a bit earlier, but and the visuals in that one when they're sort of walking back is it's just so sort of like nice. It just works really well. And I think you can see how these sort of parts, because these subtle moments, they are brought back in later episodes. Like you do see them walking back. I think it is sort of in a flashback, I think, in one of the later episodes. And so these sort of like tiny little moments do come back, and it just ties it all together so well with the other episodes. It's really nice.
Yeah, I think it does come back. Probably like during the instrumentality stuff when they were just kind of reusing pieces of footage and stuff. I think it might even be episode 25 where you have them go back to that scene, but it is different dialogue. And just mentioning the ending, I know I've already said that you messaged me a lot when you finished watching the show, and obviously you really liking those final kind of couple of episodes of why we're doing this podcast. So I guess what's your takeaway from them? What's your interpretation, and what do they mean to you?
Yeah, the final two episodes. Because you'd mentioned a bit to me before I saw them, even before I started the show, how it does go into those hand drawn moments. And so I knew these last two episodes were going to be different, but I wasn't expecting them to sort of hit me so much. And when I finished them, I was just like, oh gosh, my. And you even mentioned to me, I started watching episode 25 straight after 24, and you said no, wait at least a night, and then you can watch it, so you can just take them in so much better and so much more so, because they need that sort of extra little bit of attention. And so definitely they were like really good, and they just hit me so well. And like I think it definitely comes, it is in now I'm 26 when it's just Shinji sort of going through it. That's where the moments that I really love are, because it's those hand drawn sort of parts. They're the parts that I absolutely love, when Shinji is sort of working out his world again after going through the instrumentality project. And yeah, I just really love those. And it's sort of, I remember, I think I was able to tell you a tiny little bit about how it, like what I was thinking about it, but I couldn't get it across in message exactly what it was. But I suppose this is why this episode is so good, because I can finally gush about it as much as I want. Um, and I am, don't you worry. Because the part when they sort of go into these hand sketched Copic artwork pieces, they just so beautifully capture sort of like with Shinji sort of trying to rebuild himself. But he's not quite there perfect. But he's definitely on his way there, and he's sort of trying to work himself out after going through the instrumentality. And I think the reason why is because the sketches also would be what, this is the way I looked at it, is they're also almost what the artist would be producing whilst they're sort of working out the character design and the story progression and working out what landscapes could feature and other little components like that that sort of come together to create this wonderful sort of piece of art. And I was thinking, like, in the beginning, these sort of sketches are when sort of like the creation of these things are at their rawest, and possibly when they're like the most full of emotion, because you're just trying to get those ideas down, just trying to get what you're feeling down on that page. And I'm thinking this is almost exactly what Shinji's experiencing, because he's sort of like, he's letting go all of his feelings and trying to work himself out again and sort of build his character up. After sort of like hating himself for so long and sort of just trying to get there. And it's almost working because his current state is not perfect. And you sort of see those words flashing on the screen as he's sort of like going, questioning himself. Or like the universe is almost questioning him, trying to like get those points across. And it's in the same way that the sketches aren't perfect or they're not complete, but he's like finding himself in the same way that the sketches are finding themselves. And there's sort of this moment of realization at the end, and it's like that's when you have the congratulations moment that Shinji has, and that's when the world that is in the anime is sort of like drawn in its complete style again, and it's got all that color. And I think those, having it done in that just that Copic raw draw styling thing, just gets that message across so much more, and I just really love it. And I'm sure it's mainly just because they ran out of time and they ran out of the budget, as I think you told me that's why they had to desperately come up with these hand sketch things. But I like to think that that's the little bit more of a deeper meaning behind it, or at least that's what it made me feel when I was watching it. And I think just having that, just like, it made it just that much sort of richer. And oh my gosh, I really love those two episodes.
Thank you for saying all that. I definitely like the reason I like wanted you to watch the show, and I couldn't just say like, oh, this is like this is the final episode. Watch this. But I knew that when it got to like, I was like, look at this picture, and this is from the show. You know, I knew that when it got to all that stuff, you'd really dig it.
Yeah, you were so spot on there.
Going on to the film, could you say how much you like the ending of the show? And obviously the film it can be viewed as an alternative or kind of sequential ending. It's tonally quite different, and I guess the style of it's different. That instead of stripping it away, there's a lot more kind of impressive animation and kind of visual spectacle. So I was just wondering kind of what you think of the film.
Yeah, the film as a whole I did really like as well. You're correct in saying it has got a completely different sort of feel to it. But I think because I was interested in the story, but because I wasn't so super invested all the time in sort of like, oh, where's Adam at the moment, and oh, what's going on with Lilith and all these government organisations. I did get a bit lost in all of those. So having the film there to back those up was good, but also I didn't mind too much. Um, Even so when watching it, but definitely you're right in saying the ending being different. I think for me, I was worried about the film because with you saying about the ending, I didn't want them to sort of replace my beloved final episodes with something else. But actually, I think ultimately I decided that this ending was sort of maybe not as good, but it is good for it, you know? And I think personally, the way I've decided to interpret it is that the two go along in aside each other. I mean, I don't know whether that's necessarily correct, but that's the way I've made it up in my little mind. So I think having that sort of like elevated the film more for me, the fact that I could sort of spot that.
And what about like the tonal shift? You know, from the more, I know the show has dark moments, but like the generally more optimistic outlook of the show to the film, which is a lot of characters dying. It's a lot of kind of hopelessness, and and also, what do you think? I guess of the very final scene of the film.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right there. There is a definite tonal shift, but I am going to be totally out there and say I don't actually find it necessarily hopeless. I mean, it's definitely sad and it's definitely depressing and poignant at points, but I didn't come out of it feeling like upset per se. I feel like for me it was actually kind of hopeful in a strange way. I think because with the characters dying, most of them you're prepared for because it's referenced to in the TV show in episode 25. So I was sort of like not ready for it, but I wasn't sort of like surprised. So I was able to sort of digest those characters dying a lot more. And for me, sort of, I think the final scene, I find it more hopeful than anything because the way I sort of interpreted it was as though the characters are coming out of the Human Instrumentality project and they've sort of found themselves now. So sort of Shinji has probably just gone through what's happened in episode 26, and probably Asuka has had a similar thing happen to her, and they've sort of both come out of it. And I'm reckoning as other people sort of realize themselves and sort of progress, and they have the choice, as it's mentioned, they have the choice to come out of it, then they will if they want. So to me, humanity isn't totally doomed, and to me, it's almost people are sort of refinding themselves, and sort of maybe, hopefully, because of it, whilst they will have had to put their barriers back up to regain human form, they might be slightly more open in their hearts and in their soul and things like that, which are possibly a good thing. And I think the thing that sort of cements this me for more for me, is how it's obviously I know Shinji ends up choking Asuka, which isn't a good sign, but it's when Asuka sort of reaches out to Shinji and then he stops. And what did it for me is that's Asuka reaching out to Shinji. It's not the other way around. And actually, I don't think once throughout the show or throughout the film do you really have Asuka sort of admitting she really does need help, or admitting sort of like can reach out to other people like Shinji. Actually, maybe things aren't quite so devastatingly bad as they could be.
And I think I am slightly coming around to yours and Ethan's interpretations of the final scene, which are a little bit more optimistic. I still think there's like a general pessimism, and it's very bold to end a film like that. But yeah, I definitely am seeing your point of view more, for sure. I think
Yeah,
it helps that I watched it with you, and you're just generally a more optimistic person than I am.
maybe. I mean, I'm not admitting that the ending is like happy or like joyful or anything, but I think it's definitely hopeful.
Watching the film again, like I'm on the podcast, I mentioned that every time I watch it, I could almost go frame by frame because I noticed so many new details. And just this time again, I've noticed a bunch of new stuff, like even more instances of the hand symbolism, which is like I think the easiest way to track like the metaphor that Evangelion's going for is just watch for the close-ups of people's hands, and how that ties into Masato's necklace, which we didn't even mention, which is one of the many kind of symbols that carries through the film. When Masato gives Shinji the speech, she hands him the necklace, and then you kind of just you got to track it. So it's when he gets the stigmata in his hands in the Evangelion, he's holding the necklace. When instrumentality starts, he's still holding it, and he carries it all the way through until the very end of the film, where it is almost kind of crucified. And I think it's just an interesting thing that we didn't mention, just that one of the many visual threads that kind of weave its way through the film. And yeah, I've seen this so many times, and there's just too much going on in End of Evangelion. It really is a very dense film. As someone who says Asuka's your favorite character, what do you think of her, I guess, kind of arc throughout the show? Like the final few episodes she has of the show, the episode that's pretty much just focused on her, and then I guess the End of Evangelion stuff.
Yeah, I think her arc is a good one because it's showing that it's not just for example Shinji who's going through sort of the trauma and stuff, but you feel sorry for all of them in equal amounts in a way. And I was kind of disappointed, I think, with those last two episodes when she was sort of just left. And the same with characters like Misato, they're just sort of left. And I can understand why. And I really appreciate episode 26 for just going into all that detail with Shinji. But I was so happy to see these characters come back in the film. And then, of course, they go and kill them. So that was short-lived. But I think it's really neatly done. I think, for me, the one thing I would have really liked is for Asuka to sort of had a sort of episode 26 moment, like when she's in that Eva, and sort of to show sort of more so how she sort of has that sort of like revelation when she sort of refines herself and she realizes that her mother is there for her. And I think just 5 minutes of that sort of episode 26 sort of stuff where they sort of get in. I know human instrumentality hasn't happened yet, so they can't do it exactly how it happens for Shinji, but I'm sure there's been something similar to happen in her brain for her to suddenly realize her mother is there, like some sort of connection. And just anything like that would have just like finished it off a lot nicer, I feel. It would have given her even more justice, sort of like having this sort of moment where she just like gives it her all. And I think what is so nice is she ends on that high that she always wanted, where she started when she came on that boat and she wanted to prove to them how good of a pilot she is. And in those last 5 minutes where she is kicking those monster eaters to shreds, she has that moment where she actually does herself justice. And I think that's really nice. But what's also really nice is she has that moment, but I don't think she necessarily feels like she needs to have that moment. That moment is entirely for her to prove to herself, not proving her worth to anyone else. And I think that's what rounds it off so wonderfully.
As the first and probably only woman to ever appear on the Mediate podcast.
Woohoo!
Sorry, Katrin. What do you think of how the show portrays its female characters and the kind of, I guess, just in the show, first of all, but then in the film with the kind of like big theme of like misogyny and like repeated like instances of kind of nudity and stuff. Like, what do you make of that as a woman?
Well, as a woman, no, definitely. I think the show is more subtle than the film in its approaches to this. I think personally there are moments throughout that just don't work super well. They're like kind of a bit questionable because they're little baby a bit too obvious. Like in the show, there's moments with Misato and Shinji that I just think, even though Misato is in a desperate situation and she's not happy with herself, I don't see a person doing that under those any circumstance, let alone those circumstances. So those bits I think are a bit sort of contrived. But then definitely there are other parts that I think really sort of push it the other way entirely, and they sort of have a lot more sort of positive outlook and view. Like there's a moment in the show which is from, now I can't tell you which episode number it is, but it's the one where they flash back and they're back in before the second impact happens, and they're at the university before anything pretty much happens. And you have Yui talking to, I'm not even going to attempt it anyway, with that guy. And he turns around to her and he sort of says, what are you going to do next? Are you going to continue in research and make such great contributions with what you've previously done as, like, I'm assuming she's probably like a doctorate student or something like that. And it's a serious, sincere question, and it's proving that she is, like, genuinely competent in the field. But then she turns around and responds by saying, but what if I actually want to start a family? Like, I don't have to go off and do this science. And I think just in that moment, I think that's what's showing that the show does have a bit more of an appreciation, because the choice has been put in her hands and she has actively been able to choose that. I can understand why some people might think it's, like, restricting, or it's like, well, that's funny. Why would she, when she's got all these options to be a scientist, why would someone turn around and say that? But I think the meaning behind it was more meant to be, it's meant to be quite liberating, because she was first presented with the fact that she is a good scientist, and that's breaking that stereotype. And it's her choice to then actively say, no, I want to go off and start a family. That's equally as acceptable. And because she's chosen to do that herself, and she's put herself on that own path, and she has no reason to justify it, I think that's where it works. And then I think you can see this sort of theme sort of running through some of the other characters, like Misato. Less so with Ritsuko, which is another unfortunate thing, because I think with her character there could have been possibly a few more moments, but you do have it coming through with her, with the connection with the mother and the Magi computer. You do see a bit of it there, but definitely Misato she sort of has been able to sort of carve her own way to sort of get where she sort of wants to be, and it's built on a lot of trauma and sort of troubles, but also she hasn't had to sort of, like, break down and sort of crumble behind those troubles, which I think a lot of other sort of shows sometimes do. The female characters sort of implode on themselves and, like, have sort of a unbearing rage and have to sort of, like, let it all out. No, these characters have sort of been able to create their own sort of, like, movement and sort of do what they want. So definitely with regards to the show, I think it's pretty alright. Some moments maybe, but some of the story stuff, I think it does pretty well.
And what would you say about, like, the film? And I know you mentioned, like, some questionable moments of, like, characterization for Misato with her relationship with Shinji. I mean, there's a scene in there's a lot of scenes in the film that are quite controversial. But I guess, what do you think of all the stuff in the film? I mean, there's a lot of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, moments in the film with, I think, Misato and Shinji, like, there's that bit where he's supposedly seeing into her mind, and I don't think that's what she would be wanting, and I think that has just been put there for the sake of it. Whereas I think if it was her active choice, as the character they built her to be, she wouldn't want that part to be shown to Shinji and stuff. And so I think that's quite unfortunate for her. And also the moment where she sort of, like, leans over to Shinji and sort of kisses him before pushing him into the elevator. Again, I just don't see that coming from her as a character. I know why she does it. I think how they built her up previously, I think she's more likely to turn around and sort of say something sort of, like, more supportive, or more sort of, like, sarcastic, like, from how I'd seen her when she's trying to kick Shinji into gear previously, and same when she's doing that with Asuka. So at no point previously have I seen her sort of, like, have any intention to do that, and I just feel like that's, again, maybe a moment just to make you gasp on purpose, and sometimes they aren't necessarily needed.
Are there any other bits from the film and the show that you kind of weren't the biggest fan of, or kind of like annoyed you in any way?
The lack of Pen. I mean, he appeared in like episode 2, and I was like, yes, the penguin, he's so cute. And then what happens to him? He should have had like a side story, like what's his name from Phineas and Ferb?
Perry, yeah.
Perry, but Pen. Imagine. That'd have been so funny. He just destroys like a secret like 15th angel or something in the background.
When we do the podcast and we kind of reach the end, we do our like summary, our final thoughts, and then give it a score out of 10. I know you don't normally like to do it, but do you want to give your kind of final thoughts and score the show and the film? And if you give both a 10, then we'll just kick Johnny off and you'll replace him in the podcast now.
I see.
Create the first Mediate 40.
This might be that moment. So overall, the show, I so loved. I loved the way it went from the first episode. I don't really think there was any episode that I disliked. Whereas normally...
What about Magma Diver?
Oh yeah, Magma Diver. I forgot about that. Maybe that's a good sign. I mean, a sign that it was bad, the fact that I completely forgot about it. That one was okay, apart from it was very red. Like, why so much red? I know they were in lava, but it just made it so hard to watch. Like, everything was just the same colour. All these sort of like reds and browns, and by the end of it, I was just sick of it. And even like Asuka's Eva is red, so they didn't stand out. It was probably one of the few filler episodes maybe out there, because not much really happened, I don't think. Yeah, so totally forgot that one existed. There's maybe one or two other, a few of those earlier ones like that, where there's maybe an angel sort of popping by just to say hello and then get destroyed without much happening. But apart from those, I did enjoy it. Yeah, really, really liked it. And the film as well, I was really pleasantly surprised by it, because I didn't know whether I was going to like it. Although I went in hoping I would, and with sort of like open arms saying, I'm going to give this all the attention it deserves. And that worked out. And that was really, really fun as well. And I don't think there's very many shows where I've sort of been left sort of like thinking, I still want to know more about these characters. Let me find out more about them and see if they're okay. And so that is, and just overall, that just like really ties it all together for me, knowing why I sort of love it so much. And I think what was so nice about it was the last 2 episodes of the show, I was sort of just left with this feeling where I was just smiling and I had this warmth in my gut. And I still had that when the credits were rolling and when it finished. And I still had that feeling within me. And that feeling only comes when I'm watching something that has really, truly affected me and really made me feel so warm in my heart. And that's what tells me that this is definitely one of my favourite things. It's so good. So, rounding that off with my scores, I would definitely 100% give the show a 10, because despite those few funny episodes, those few funny moments, I think it balances it off and counteracts it with moments that are even bigger and better and more grand, and I really love that. As for the film, I think I will probably have to give that one like a 9.5, just because it was really good, but I wasn't left with that sort of like really warm feeling within me that I had with the show.
Alright, well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And we won't talk about Evangelion again, I promise. This is the last episode. Until 4.0 comes out, and then we'll do a podcast on the
yeah.
reboot.
That's it. That's my next one, is to watch the rebuilds. I'm gonna be on those as soon as possible.
All right, well, we'll see you then.
Bye.